For the longest time, if you were looking at the Middle East, you'd make one simple bet. That Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were basically one and the same. A single, unified bloc. A real pillar of stability. But wow, by early 2026, that pillar didn't just crack, it completely crumbled. And what it revealed was this bitter rivalry that's now, well, it's reshaping the entire region. So the big question is, how did it all fall apart so fast? Let's pinpoint the exact moment things really started to go south.
Just look at how incredibly fast this all happened. We're talking about a few weeks at the end of 2025, where two supposed allies got locked into a direct proxy war. First, the UAE's guys seized territory that's critical to Saudi security. And what does Riyadh do? They don't send a diplomat. They respond with an airstrike on an Amarti weapons shipment. By January 9th, just 9 days into the new year, the UAE's entire project in southern Yemen just completely collapses. This wasn't some slow drift apart. No, this was a sudden, violent break.
An airstrike between allies. That's almost unthinkable, right? It just forces us to ask that crucial question. How on earth did it come to this? What could possibly tear apart an alliance that, for so long, seemed absolutely rock solid? To figure that out, we have to look past the battlefields and go inside the boardrooms and palaces of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi.
When you boil it all down, this is really a story of two grand strategies that are just fundamentally incompatible. These two monarchies, who were once united against all sorts of common threats, are now being driven by completely different and often totally conflicting visions for their own futures and for the future of the entire region.
Okay, this slide right here, this is the whole story in a nutshell. It gets to the absolute heart of the conflict. So on one side, you've got Saudi Arabia with what we're calling a de-risking model. Think about it. Under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, everything is about creating calm, about de-escalation. Why? Because you can't build your massive Vision 2030 project if the neighborhood is on fire. You need that foreign investment. But then look at the UAE. They're playing a totally different game, an activist game. They project power outward. They build these networks of ports and proxies, often in really unstable places. So you have one country that desperately needs stability, while the other, well, some critics would say it invests in chaos. It's like they're playing two completely different games on the very same board.
And if you want to understand what's driving the Saudis, you have to understand one thing. Vision 2030. It is everything. Seriously. It's not just some economic plan, it's their national survival strategy. For it to work, it needs predictability, it needs a stable neighborhood. An endless war on your border or instability messing with the Red Sea, that's a direct threat to the kingdom's entire future. So, yeah, de-escalation becomes priority number one. But here's the economic reality that's really cranking up the tension. The UAE is, frankly, decades ahead. Over 3/4 of its GDP is already from non-oil sectors. They've already done the very thing Saudi Arabia is now desperately trying to do. This isn't some friendly race. It's become a zero-sum game where Saudi Arabia feels like it has to claw back business from its smaller, much more nimble neighbor.
And this isn't just some abstract rivalry. Look at the specific points of friction here. Saudi Arabia is telling big multinational companies, move your headquarters from Dubai to Riyadh or you lose our government contracts. They're putting up new trade restrictions that are aimed squarely at the UAE's free trade zones. And then you have these public spats at OPEC Plus meetings over who gets to pump how much oil. Every single one of these moves is a direct shot, turning economic competition into a major driver of their geopolitical split.
So, where does all this strategic and economic tension actually boil over? Well, it spills into the region's most brutal and devastating civil wars. Let's take a look at Yemen and Sudan, because that's where this Cold War has turned tragically hot.
This table lays it out so clearly. You can see just how directly they're working against each other. In both Yemen and Sudan, they are backing opposing sides. Let's start with Yemen. Riyadh wants a unified state on its border, so it backs the Presidential Leadership Council, the PLC. Abu Dhabi, on the other hand, wants to control strategic ports, so it backs the STC, who are southern separatists. Then you jump over to Sudan. Riyadh is backing the official army, the SAF, hoping for some stability. The UAE, they're supporting the rival paramilitary, the RSF, to protect their own economic interests. In both places, they are actively working to undermine each other's goals.
So let's go back to that critical moment in Yemen, because it's so important. When the STC launched that offensive, it wasn't just another military move. It was a direct challenge to Saudi Arabia's backyard, to its sphere of influence. For Riyadh, this was an existential threat. A red line had been crossed. The response was incredibly swift and brutal.
a targeted airstrike and a lightning-fast counteroffensive that completely took apart the UAE's proxy project. It was a clear, unambiguous message about who's really in charge.
You know, in the middle of all this geopolitical chess, we just can't forget the absolutely devastating human cost. In Sudan, the rivalry between these external powers like the UAE and Saudi Arabia has helped fuel a conflict that has created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. We're talking 14 million people displaced from their homes. This is the real-world tragic consequence of their feud.
All right, so what does this all mean for everyone else in the region? This isn't just some private squabble between two neighbors. The breakdown of this alliance creates really significant, widespread dangers for the entire Middle East.
This right here, this is the kind of statement you almost never hear between Gulf allies. It's just not done. When Saudi Arabia comes out and officially declares its national security is a red line and does it in direct response to something the UAE did, it signals a fundamental change. The gloves are well and truly off.
So this rivalry doesn't stay contained. It creates at least three huge risks for the whole region. First, you get security vacuums. As they're busy fighting each other, they create breathing room for common enemies, like the Houthis and Al-Qaeda, to get stronger. Second, it completely paralyzes peacemaking. I mean, how are you supposed to mediate a conflict in Sudan when the mediators themselves are backing opposite sides? It's impossible. And third, it's a direct threat to maritime security, because their competition for ports could turn a vital global trade route into a potential military flashpoint.
All of this brings us to the new reality in the Gulf. The old way of talking, all that language about brotherhood and a shared destiny, that just doesn't apply anymore. We are in a new, colder, and much more pragmatic era.
Probably the best way to describe this new relationship is managed competition. Look, they'll almost certainly avoid a direct all-out war because it's just too costly for everybody. But don't get it twisted. They will continue to compete and compete fiercely through economic pressure, through diplomatic power plays, and yes, through proxy battles in the region's most fragile states. This is the new normal.
And this really is the ultimate takeaway. The illusion of a unified Gulf is gone. It's been shattered. We are now in an era defined by hard realism, where national interest, not some idea of fraternal loyalty, is what dictates policy. As the old saying goes, two kings cannot rule from one room, and now the entire region is going to have to adapt to their rivalry.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling question to think about. In a Middle East, where the two most powerful Arab states are now competitors instead of partners, who is it that will ultimately benefit from all the instability this creates? Who really stands to gain from the chaos?
Welcome to The Explainer. You know, for years, policymakers in the West just saw Saudi Arabia and the UAE as one single unified bloc, a package deal. But that assumption, it's now in ruins. Today, we're going to unpack the massive shift in the Middle East, the total breakdown of this critical alliance. And look, this isn't just some minor disagreement. This quote right here gets to the absolute heart of the issue. We are talking about two incredibly wealthy, incredibly ambitious nations that are now pulling the entire region in completely opposite directions. And what's so wild is that it wasn't always like this. For the better part of a decade, these two acted in perfect lockstep. All right, let's dive into this. It's a really complex story of ambition, power, and what the future of the Middle East is going to look like. So the moment everything changed, when the quiet tension became an open, undeniable conflict, that really all came to a head in late 2025. This was the point the rivalry moved from behind closed doors in the palace right onto the battlefield. And boom, this single act was a strategic collision. It basically transformed a political rivalry into a direct proxy fight, making it crystal clear to everyone watching that the old alliance, it was officially over. But to really truly understand the fracture, we've got to rewind a bit and remember the solid foundation this whole thing was built on. I mean, this was an alliance that once reshaped the entire region. Just look at this. Throughout the last decade, they were this powerful, united front. From launching a war together in Yemen to isolating Qatar, they worked hand in glove to deal with what they saw as shared threats. Their coordination was so tight that, honestly, most of the world saw them as a single entity. And this wasn't just about geopolitics. It was personal. The mentor-protege dynamic between the two leaders, MBZ and MBS, was seen as the glue holding their nation's policies together. But, as we're about to see, this personal bond, just like the geopolitical alliance, was about to be completely transformed. So what caused the big split? Well, it wasn't just one single event. It was about deep structural disagreements on the very future of the Middle East itself. Now, this right here is fascinating because it just crystallizes their core conflict. Saudi Arabia, this huge land power, needs stable countries on its borders to protect its future. But the UAE, a maritime trading nation, actually thrives by projecting power through ports and proxies, often inside fragile or failing states. These two worldviews, they just can't coexist. And that personal dynamic, it's soured big time. MBS was no longer the protege. He started reasserting Saudi Arabia's traditional role as the big brother in the region. But the UAE, having built up its own incredible economic and military power, was just not willing to play second fiddle anymore. The student was no longer following the mentor. So, this fundamental disagreement has now erupted into open competition across multiple arenas. We're talking everything from proxy wars to corporate boardrooms. This table just lays it all out perfectly. In places like Yemen and Sudan, they're literally backing opposing sides. Riyadh supports the official state, while Abu Dhabi backs rebels and separatists. Economically, Saudi's Vision 2030 is a direct, you could even say existential, challenge to Dubai's dominance. Even on things like oil policy and sea power, their interests are pulling apart. And make no mistake, this is a zero-sum game. Riyadh is using its massive market as leverage, basically telling international companies, you have to choose a side. This isn't friendly competition. It is a direct shot at replacing Dubai as the region's economic center of gravity. And you can see just how enormous the stakes are in this economic race. I mean, the UAE has a massive head start in diversifying its economy. Look at that. Over 3/4 of it is non-oil. But Saudi Arabia is trying to use its colossal scale and resources to catch up, and to do it in a fraction of the time. And this rivalry, it's popping up everywhere. It's a battle in the skies, with new airlines going head-to-head. It's a race in the cloud, a high-stakes competition to dominate artificial intelligence, which they both see as the key to the future. And it's a chess match in diplomacy, where each nation is carving out its own path, trying to become the indispensable partner for global powers. So, where does this all leave us? What's the new reality? Well, it's not all-out war, that's for sure. But the old, cozy alliance is long gone. We're in a new, much more complicated era. The best term to describe this new status quo is managed competition. And the key thing to get here is that this is the new normal. They'll cooperate when it suits them, say within OPEC+, but they're going to compete fiercely pretty much everywhere else. The disputes are managed, not solved. And the fallout from this is significant. The whole idea of a unified Gulf is basically dead. This rivalry creates power vacuums that other players can exploit, and it's forcing a major realignment across the entire Middle East. For global powers like the US, it means you have to navigate a much more fragmented and unpredictable region. And that right there, that's the critical question, isn't it? When you have two incredibly wealthy, ambitious states pulling the region in opposite directions, each one totally convinced of its own vision, can this rivalry really be managed? The risk of miscalculation remains dangerously high. This new era in the Gulf is defined by competition, and its future is anything but certain.